We all have things in our lives that we love. It could be a job, a relationship, or even a place. But sometimes God calls us to let go of these things. This can be painful. It can feel like we are losing a part of ourselves. Change is never easy. It's natural to resist it. We like what is familiar. It makes us feel safe. But what if God has something better in store for us? What if He's trying to move us into a new season of blessing? Letting go is a process. It takes time to grieve what we have lost, but we must remember that God is with us every step of the way. He will never leave us nor forsake us. Sometimes we don't understand why we go through painful experiences. We wonder why God would allow us to suffer, but God sees things that we don't see. He has a plan for our lives, and His plan is always good. These painful removals, as difficult as they may be, often serve a deeper purpose. They may be necessary for our growth, our protection, or our destiny. They may be God's way of making room for something new and wonderful in our lives. God doesn't waste our pain. He uses it to shape us and mold us into the people He created us to be. He is more interested in our character than our comfort. He wants us to be strong, resilient, and full of faith. The Bible is full of stories about people who had to let go of familiar things in order to follow God. One of these stories is the story of Lot's wife. When God called Lot and his family out of Sodom, He told them not to look back. But Lot's wife couldn't resist. She looked back at the city she was leaving behind, and she was turned into a pillar of salt. Her story is a warning to us about the danger of clinging to the past. When we focus on what we've left behind, we miss out on the blessings that are ahead of us. We become stuck in our pain and unable to move forward. God wants us to keep our eyes fixed on Him, not on our circumstances. Another powerful story is that of the widow of Zarephath. She was facing a desperate situation with only a handful of flour left to feed herself and her son. Yet, when the prophet Elijah asked her for water and bread, she obeyed. She chose to trust God, even in the midst of her own need. And because of her obedience, God provided for her miraculously. The jar of flour never ran out, and the jug of oil never emptied. This story illustrates a profound truth. Sometimes God asks us to empty ourselves so He can fill us up with something new. He might ask us to let go of our security, our comfort, or our plans, so He can pour out His blessings in abundance. Section 5, Separation for Growth. Abraham, the father of our faith, also experienced the pain of removal. God called him to leave his country and his relatives and go to a land that He would show him. This was a difficult decision for Abraham, but he obeyed God's call. Later, God instructed Abraham to separate from his nephew Lot. Lot had chosen to live near the wicked city of Sodom, and God wanted to protect Abraham from the influence of that city. Even though it meant parting ways with family, Abraham trusted God's plan. Sometimes God asks us to separate from people we love for our own good. It doesn't mean we don't care about them anymore. It simply means we recognize that God's plan for our lives might be different from theirs. Section 6, Running from Our Calling. Jonah's story is a classic example of what happens when we try to run from God's plan. God called Jonah to preach to the people of Nineveh, but Jonah didn't want to go. He boarded a ship headed in the opposite direction, trying to escape God's call. We all know what happened next. A storm arose and Jonah was thrown overboard. He ended up in the belly of a fish for 3 days and 3 nights before finally crying out to God for mercy. Jonah's experience teaches us that we can't outrun God. His plans will always prevail. Running from our calling only leads to more pain and suffering. It's always better to surrender to God's will, even when we don't understand it. Section 7, From Prison to Palace. Joseph's story is a testament to God's faithfulness even in the midst of betrayal and hardship. Sold into slavery by his own brothers, Joseph faced years of injustice and imprisonment, yet he never lost sight of God. Instead of becoming bitter and resentful, Joseph chose to trust God's plan. He remained faithful in his circumstances, and eventually God elevated him to a position of power and influence in Egypt. Joseph's story reminds us that God sees our pain, He knows our struggles, and He has a plan to turn our mourning into dancing. What the enemy intended for evil, God can use for good. He can elevate us from the lowest of lows to the highest of highs. Section 8, Embracing the Journey. These stories, though centuries old, still resonate with us today. They remind us that we are not alone in our pain. God has been walking with his children through seasons of loss and change since the beginning of time. The pain of removal is real, but it doesn't have to destroy us. It can refine us, strengthen us, and prepare us for something even greater. It's all part of the journey. It's all part of God's plan. Section 9. Trusting the potter's hand. Imagine a lump of clay on a potter's wheel. The clay doesn't understand why it's being spun around, molded, and reshaped. It might feel uncomfortable, even painful at times, but the potter has a vision. He sees the potential in the clay. We are like that clay in the hands of God. He is the potter, and we are the clay. He is shaping us and molding us into vessels of honor. Sometimes that process involves removing things from our lives that are hindering our growth. Trust the process, trust the potter. Even when it hurts, even when you don't understand, know that God is working all things together for your good. He is creating something beautiful in your life. Section 10. A future filled with hope. When we surrender to God's plan, we open ourselves up to a future filled with hope and promise. We can face the pain of removal with courage, knowing that God is with us every step of the way. He will never leave us nor forsake us, so embrace the journey, embrace the pain, embrace the unknown, and trust that God is leading you to a place of blessing, a place of abundance, a place He has prepared just for you. Your story is not over yet. The best is yet to come.